Welcome back to our Bible study on the Great Commission. In last week in Lesson 1, we talked about the Great Commission, which is Matthew 28, verses 16 through 20. We talked about how it's not a suggestion, it's a command. We also spent some time talking about authority and the fact that we can, as individuals, piggyback on Jesus' authority because we have none of our own. And we talked a little bit about kingdom disciples, who we said were kingdom disciples, a person who has who has decided that following Jesus Christ takes precedence over everything else. This week we are going to take a little side step in what I have decided to call bonus lesson. We are going to step away for a moment from Tony Evans's book and instead take a quick look at Robby Gallaty's book, Growing Up. And I will put a link to that down in the description as usual. It might be a resource that you want to pick up at some point. But to be clear, lesson 1 was last week. This week we're calling bonus lesson. Next week, we'll go back into Tony Evans with Lesson 2. Realize that's confusing, but there is a good reason I did it that way. I won't bore you with the reason for having done that. The actual title of Robby's book that we're going to use is Growing Up, How to Be a Disciple Who Makes Disciples, or in other words, Kingdom Disciples. If I were to subtitle our lesson today, I would call it Ain't the Pastor's Job. Hopefully that'll tickle your interest a little bit. I'm very sincere about that. I'm not being facetious at all. And I would ask you if you have ever heard anything like this come out of a believer's mouth. And I'll ask you to use your imagination a little bit. Have you ever heard someone say something like this? Oh, I could never witness to lost people. I'm too, whatever, bashful, untrained, uneducated, whatever excuse that might be. And besides, that's why we have a pastor, to witness to people, right? That's why we hire a pastor. Or maybe try this. I could never minister to another believer's spiritual needs. I'm too, again, fill in the blank, bashful, untrained, unwilling, whatever. Besides, that's what the deacons are for. We have deacons to minister to people who are hurting. Or maybe you've heard something like this. I could never teach or mentor new believers because I'm too, once again, fill in the blank, bashful, busy, untrained, whatever excuse we may want to offer. You ever heard anything like that? I sure have. I've probably even heard it come out of my own mouth at one time or another. In my experience, don't know about yours, my experience, that attitude is pretty prevalent among believers in the church today, and that's very unfortunate. Got some news for you, folks. Discipleship, as we've been defining it, ain't the pastor's job. It ain't the deacon's job. It ain't the Sunday school director's job. If you go to a large church and you got permanent staff, it ain't their job either. Folks, discipleship is your job. It's my job. It's every believer's job. The job of the pastor is to equip and train us. It's up to us then to go get outside the church walls and be the church, which we talked about last lesson. The 3 go items in the Great Commission were evangelize, baptize, and teach. That is the Great Commission. Now, sure, it is the pastor's responsibility to disciple within his own circle of acquaintance, but the task of reaching the world, as we were tasked with doing in the Great Commission, that falls on the believers and on the disciples. You don't believe me? Do you believe the Apostle Paul? Consider his words in 2 Timothy 2, verses 1 through 2. You then, my child, be strengthened by the grace that is in Christ Jesus. and what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Replicate. Make disciples who then go out and make disciples. Reverend Billy Graham said that verse influenced his ministry on the view of discipleship more than any other. And if you think that my opinion here is worthless and Dennis, you're just some old numbskull from Reynolds County, you don't know what you're talking about, get off the air. Well, maybe you'd like to hear what Reverend Billy Graham has to say about it. In his words, Paul taught Timothy. Timothy shared what he knew with faithful men, and the faithful men were supposed to teach others also. And so on the process goes on and on. If every believer followed this pattern, we could reach the world in one generation. Listen to this. Mass crusades in which I believe and to which I have committed my life will never accomplish the Great Commission. One-on-one relationships will. One-on-one relationships. We'll get into that further in this study. But first, I want to give you an illustration on one of the things I thought about calling this lesson was multiplication, not addition. And I want to give you an illustration. And I thought about making a chart and putting it up there for you to look at, and decided not to do that because then you'd be looking at the chart, trying to figure it out in place of listening to me. And I just want to take a few minutes to have you listen to what this illustration is I'm going to give you. This is Robby Gallaty's illustration, not mine. Again, I don't want to be accused of plagiarism. I will gladly give credit to the folks who created this content. But I want you to consider a situation where we have an evangelist or preacher, whatever you want to think of. And this is like a really, really effective evangelist. They go out every day and lead someone to the Lord. In the space of a year, they lead 365 people to the Lord. That's pretty good. Can't really imagine that. But for the sake of an illustration, let's consider that. And he does that year after year after year. After 2 years, he's up to 730. After 10 years, he's up to 3,650. Simple addition. Every year, 365 new ones. Got that image in your head? Okay, now let's consider multiplication. Let's consider a disciple who spends a whole year mentoring and working closely with 2 individuals. Then the second year, that number goes to 4 individuals because they then go out and make disciples who make other disciples. As after 10 years, after 2 years, there's only 4. It doubles every year. By the time we get to 10 years, 1,024 people have been reached through discipleship. We're still behind the evangelist because, remember his number? He's at 3,650. But then look what happens as we move farther on through the multiplication rather than addition. When they both reach year 16, the discipleship program has reached 43,046,721 people. The evangelist is way back in the dust at 5,840. It's a simple concept of multiplication that you get when disciples then go out and create more disciples. As Robby Gallaty puts it, the Great Commission is designed to be a team effort. Instead of the pastors, leaders, Sunday school teachers, deacons performing all these duties of ministry in the church, the saints, that's us, are equipped to carry out the work. The ministers cannot carry out the command alone, as Paul clearly stated in Ephesians 4:11 through 12. And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that preaching and evangelism is not important. I'm not saying that at all. It's critical. But we got to keep it in a good level of balance. One of Robby's comments from this book that I've really meant something to me, and I'll pass it along to you, is he says evangelism and discipleship are two oars attached to the same boat. Both oars are necessary to reach your destination. Both are essential to carry out the Great Commission. Historically, I don't think there's any doubt we can say that the church, again, not my church, your church, anyone in particular, the collective church has done a pretty poor job of discipleship. And it's evident by the fact that we're not having a bigger impact on the world than we are. If we were going out and multiplying like we did in the illustration, the world would be a whole lot different place right now. And as Reverend Graham said, we'd reach the whole world in a generation if we did that. Again, I'm not saying that preaching isn't good. It is essential. Even Reverend Graham was a preacher. Robby Gallaty is a preacher. It's important. It is important to equip and teach and to shepherd a flock. I'm not suggesting that. But here's another comment Robby made that I think is very illustrative of what I'm trying to put forth in this lesson today. He says, preaching to make disciples is like going to the nursery and spraying the babies with milk and saying that you just fed the kids. So we got to do a better job, folks. You see the culture. Don't know what you think about it. I'm not too crazy about the way the world's going. We've got to not only do better, but we need to get through our heads. It isn't somebody else's job. We can't just sit back and say, oh, well, it's the church leadership's job to reach out. It's not. It's all of us. And this is a somewhat shorter lesson. I'm sure you appreciate that. And next week, we will go back to Tony Evans's book and lesson 2. So just to be clear, bonus lesson that we're doing today falls between lesson 1 and lesson 2. Apologize for the inconvenience or the confusion, but from here on to the end of the study, we will be back in Tony Evans's book. And I will post in this down in the description a link to Robby Gallaty's brief sermon on discipleship and the importance of discipleship. Really encourage you to go take a look at that. It'll be a blessing to you. And you might also want to grab his book. It's really good, especially on this point. So with that, I will close things out, and we will close again with Numbers 6:24 through 26. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. See you next time.